is the role of the British bases on the war in Gaza? How far is Britain willing to go to let Israel materialize its vision of a greater Israel? And what does this mean for Cyprus and its people? Joining me today on Uncensored Voices is author of Keeny Meeny, the British mercenaries who got away with war crimes, and editor of Declassified UK, Phil Miller. Welcome, Phil.
Hi, Melanie. Thanks for having me.
And thank you very much for joining me. I know you're very busy. And I just wanted to say actually that the work that you have been doing on Declassified UK is extremely important and a real eye-opener for us in Cyprus, especially about the bases and what they are actually doing and the role that they are playing, not just on the war in Gaza, but generally what the bases are doing here. So before we get into we delve into what the bases are doing in Cyprus, could you just give us a run through of when Declassified UK was set up and why was it set up? What was the need for setting up Declassified UK?
Yeah, so Declassified started about 5 years ago in response to the UK media landscape, which is very bad at covering Britain's role in the world, kind of assumes that Britain has a benign influence and forgets our colonial past. And what we wanted to do at Declassified was to expose Britain's real role in the world. And one of the kind of legacies of empire, or the forms of empire that never finished, never ended, are these military bases that Britain still has around the world. Cyprus being one of them, where it hasn't decolonized, parts of the island at all. There are other military bases in other former colonies, like in Kenya, Oman, Belize, where the countries are nominally independent, but the governments, would have enormous difficulty to actually evict the British military bases from those countries. And there are all sorts of scandals associated with the bases there, whether they're environmental damage, sexual assaults, deaths and injuries connected to activities at these bases. So we set out as part of our mission to document what was happening at these bases. So with Cyprus, I think we initially looked at the environmental impact, low-flying helicopters causing deaths to farm animals surrounding the bases. We then moved on to look at the role of the base in supplying the Saudi military during the war in Yemen. So we saw there was a flight going every week from BAE Systems, which is Britain's largest arms company, from their base in England, their factory, which has a runway airport built into it. It was sending a weekly cargo flight to a Saudi military base via RAF Akrotiri on Cyprus, and it was staying there overnight, refueling. There wasn't any disclosure about what was on board, but we were able to piece together that this was carrying spare parts for the Typhoon fighter jets that Saudi Arabia was using to bomb Yemen, where schools and hospitals have been flattened by the Saudi air war there. And then when the conflict in Gaza started last year, we noticed a lot of military flights going from the base to Israel, or surveillance flights going from the base over Gaza. And yeah, that's kind of led up to our current coverage, which I think has caused, like you were saying, quite a lot of concern in Cyprus.
So from your research that you've done, how many bases does the United Kingdom have across the world? Just so people can get a clear picture of what is going on and how decolonization has never really happened.
Yeah, I mean, it depends slightly what you count as a base, but we counted over 100 base sites. This was a few years ago we did the research, so I think there were a couple in Afghanistan that we included that wouldn't be there now. And these range from, entire naval dockyards or airfields to facilities where they're kind of joint bases alongside, say, the Americans or another country, to kind of extraordinary relationships like in Brunei, which is down by towards Malaysia, Indonesia, and Southeast Asia, where there's a dictatorship there that, you know, has all these British military officers out there on loan to its own armed forces, in kind of senior positions in military bases there. So in some parts of the world, it's like the empire never ended. And then Cyprus is obviously a particularly stark example, because they claim that this is still sovereign British territory. You know, the 3% of Cyprus that they've refused to leave. So yeah, that was kind of the range. You can go on our website and there's a map there where we mapped out all the bases, so people can look at that if they want to see.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that Cyprus came up on your radar when you were looking into the war in Yemen, and obviously this has escalated now, especially during the past, well, a year and 2 months with the war in Gaza. How many spy flights? Do we know how many spy flights have gone from Cyprus, or what sort of flights go from Cyprus to Gaza? Have they been using Akrotiri to do cargo flights? Do we know what they've been sending? And these are questions that people have asked, keep asking everybody. If anybody that knows what's going on at Akrotiri, I mean, what exactly is going on? Do we have an idea?
Yeah, so the surveillance flights, we have quite a good idea about their movement. There've been, I think, over 450 at last count. They began in December.
Is this since October 7th or before?
It's since December, the start of December last year, 2023. Okay. So immediately after October 7th, there were surveillance flights going from Akrotiri that would fly up to the edge of Israeli airspace and the edge of Gazan airspace. And then they'd circle around there quite a few times and then come back. And then after the ceasefire agreement broke down, end of November, start of December last year, the UK Defence Secretary announced that they were going to do these surveillance flights actually over Gaza itself, supposedly to gather intelligence to help Israel rescue the hostages. And we found these flights have been going almost twice a day since then, virtually every day. And they spend about 5 hours at a time in the air, much of that over Gaza. Now, whether this is really to help rescue hostages is pretty contentious, because Israel has rescued very few hostages through military means. And when it has done, in almost every case, huge numbers of civilians have died in those raids. So it's pretty questionable why the Royal Air Force would want to support that kind of activity. And of course, most of the hostages who have been released were released in that ceasefire deal before these flights even started. So if the UK was serious about getting hostages out, you would have thought it wouldn't bother with these flights at all, and it would just put a lot of diplomatic pressure on Netanyahu to do a deal to get the hostages out, which is what many of the hostage families want anyway. So that's led people to wonder and question whether these flights are purely looking for hostages, or if this intelligence is being shared with the IDF for other purposes, which would raise, quite worrying implications, given how often the Israeli military is hitting civilian targets in Gaza. So that's the surveillance flights, and we actually managed to film one of them taking off from Akrotiri. In addition, there have been military cargo flights, both British and American, going to Israel. The British deny these are carrying weapons. They say they're carrying medical aid or carrying diplomats. It's hard to corroborate the number of flights that there have been with the amount of with the number of diplomatic visits or amount of medical supplies that are supposed to be sent. There does seem to be a discrepancy there. And the US military flights include special forces planes, planes that are known to be used by US special forces. So that obviously raises concerns that these flights may have been carrying weapons, given that the US military is known to be supplying weapons to Israel in vast quantities. And then aside from that, you've also got from Akrotiri, the Typhoon fighter jets Royal Air Force Typhoon fighter jets this time, going to bomb Yemen. I think they've done it at least 5 times. So instead of outsourcing that to the Saudis, they've been, since January this year, they began doing that themselves to bomb the Houthis in response to their blockade on Israeli-linked shipping in the Red Sea, which the Houthis said they were doing in solidarity with Gaza until enough humanitarian aid was allowed to enter Gaza. And flights have also gone on the 2 occasions when Iran has been targeting Israel. The Royal Air Force dispatched fighter jets to try and intercept some of those projectiles when they were over Iraq and Syria. So it's been a hugely significant base this last year.
Well, yes, for us, it's actually quite obvious and evident because we actually get to see the planes that take off and land, because they fly quite low over not just Akrotiri, but the whole of Limassol. And when Iran launched the rockets towards Israel, we could see them flying over Limassol. So for us, it's not a surprise, but at the same time it is, because although we had the bases for so many years, we've been brought up basically side by side, and we know what it means to have a base. It's never been so evident and so intense in what we've been seeing going on at this moment. But you mentioned before the surveillance flights, and I remember you Declassified doing a piece on the World Central Kitchen aid workers being killed and targeted. Basically, they were, for use of a better word, they were stalked basically and targeted in the way that we know happened. And just before that, there was a spy flight over Gaza. Have you linked other such events to spy flights going over Gaza?
Yeah, so with the World Central Kitchen strike, which killed 3 British aid workers who were all military veterans themselves, we were able to show from open source flight radar data that there was a British surveillance plane in the air over Gaza in the hours leading up to their assassination. And the time that the actual killing happened, it was returning to Akrotiri by that stage. But it gathered footage that would seem to shed light, or could potentially shed light, on the build-up to their deaths. And we did a Freedom of Information request to the UK Ministry of Defence to ask for the footage, and they refused to disclose it to us. They also said they wouldn't give it to the families of the aid workers who died, which we felt was particularly shocking. And there are other cases, including there's a case, I think it was in February this year, when a couple of hostages were rescued from Rafah in the south of Gaza. There was surveillance planes in the air in the hours before and after that operation, and large numbers of civilians were killed in that operation. And so given that these flights are supposedly to help with hostage rescue, that raises questions about whether they were involved in any way in that operation. But when these questions have been asked, there's a complete wall of silence from the UK military, which has made it really hard to get to the bottom of what's going on. So yeah, there's a real dearth of democratic accountability and transparency here.
I'm sure you might get this question quite a lot. Did you expect anything better from Keir Starmer compared to Rishi Sunak? Did you expect that things would change, or things would be better, or he'd have a different stance on the war in Gaza?
I think some people hoped he would because of his background as a human rights lawyer. At Declassified, we'd covered his rise quite closely since he became Labour Party leader. His kind of purge of the left of the Labour Party, his treatment, his involvement in Julian Assange's case from his time as Director of Public Prosecutions. And there was certain legislation to do with undercover policing that the Conservatives put through that he whipped his MPs to support. So that was an indication that he was going down quite an authoritarian direction at the outset, and being particularly kind of deferential to pro-Israel pressure groups around the Labour Party as a way of distancing himself and trying to differentiate himself from Jeremy Corbyn's time as Labour leader. So, we weren't that surprised, but, when you think of these policies like the surveillance flights that were begun by a very kind of right-wing Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, for the Labour Party to just continue those so uncritically, and not really seem to have any open discussion about the human rights implications of sharing battlefield surveillance footage with a military that's accused of genocide. Not seeming to have more concerns about that. That is quite surprising that's gone on. And what we've seen though is that some of the arms sales, for instance, they suspended, but not arms sales that would go to Israel from Britain via the US. There's a particular type of fighter jet that Israel uses, the F-35, the most advanced fighter jet. And that's made by an American company with lots of support from British manufacturers. So the UK's refused to put an embargo on parts for that aircraft that are shipped via the US. So it seems like as much as Labour wants to pay lip service to international law, it will only go so far as America's interests and what the US empire, for want of a better word, would allow or tolerate in Whitehall.
Well, last week, Starmer was in Cyprus. He paid a very quick visit to the Cypriot president, Nikos Christodoulidis, and then he visited the troops on RAF Akrotiri. And he said, and actually this sentence from his speech to the troops went viral. It was all over Instagram and Facebook and all the other social media, that we are very proud of you, but we can't necessarily say exactly what you're doing here. And there was a lot of people writing below that, yeah, we know what you're doing. You're being complicit in genocide. And this has come after, this is only the second visit of a UK Prime Minister after 1971, when Edward Heath came to Cyprus. And 3 years later, we had a coup and an invasion. So people are quite, not that anything like that would happen again, but hopefully not. But people were worried about it, and we are still worried about it, because this is the first prime minister to come after Turkey has occupied Cyprus. And within all the chaos that is going on at this moment in the Middle East, and Israel invading Syria, taking Golan Heights completely, taking other 3 villages in Syria. And what we're witnessing basically is the carving up of Syria. Starmer's visit to Cyprus has got a lot of people on edge. What would you make of this visit?
Yeah, I think that comment about him saying, people don't know what's going on here was quite telling.
I think that he shot himself in the foot by saying that. Yeah.
In the UK, there's been a lot of pressure from the right and the kind of nostalgic right, people like Nigel Farage, over this recent deal, or this deal that the UK is trying to do with the Chagos Islands. So they're this British colony in the Indian Ocean that hosts a major US military base, Diego Garcia. And the UK has never really had legal sovereignty over those islands, but the International Court of Justice has said the sovereignty belongs to Mauritius. So the UK has done this deal to eventually give the base, the island that the base is on, back to Mauritius in, I think, 99 years' time. But that's caused a big backlash from the kind of far right in the UK. They're saying, Starmer's giving away parts of Britain, and all this kind of rhetoric. And they've said, well, is Cyprus going to be next? So possibly the visit was in that context to show, that he's still holding on to Cyprus and there won't be any changes there. But also, like you say, with everything happening in the Middle East at the moment, for him to visit Cyprus, again, it sort of shows that he's very aware that the bases are there and, keen to keep using them for all the kinds of things that we've seen happening and haven't been allowed to see happening over the last year. So yeah, I think it shows that he's pretty keen to keep hold of the bases there.
Right, so you just answered my next question, because my next question was going to be, how important are the bases in Cyprus to the United Kingdom? And obviously, from what you just said, they are extremely important because of where they are geographically, but also at the same time, Starmer wants to show to the right-wingers how he's not letting any United Kingdom sovereign territory, as they call it, go. And as I keep saying that whenever you travel through the bases, you can see on Google Maps, and it's not even on the bases, because there are surrounding villages on the Akrotiri, RAF Akrotiri and Episcopi, that when you go through those villages, it says United Kingdom. You cross the border basically without even knowing that you're crossing over to United Kingdom territory. How far do you think the UK will bend over backwards to facilitate what is going on at the moment in the Middle East, and facilitate basically letting Israel materialize its vision of a greater Israel? Because me being one of those people, a lot of people have been saying, especially in the past year, that Israel's end goal is a greater Israel. And within that greater Israel, there is Syria, Lebanon, part of Egypt, part of Jordan, and part of Saudi Arabia. And a lot of people have said that that's ridiculous, that's conspiracy theories, but now we are actually watching it materialize on our phones, basically. There's the ongoing genocide in Gaza. They're taking over the West Bank. They've invaded Lebanon, and now they've invaded Syria. So when do you think England will say, the UK, I keep saying England, but the UK will say, enough, you've taken enough? Do you think there will ever come a point where they will say, you've taken enough?
Well, I think there are kind of two dynamics going on. There's the extent of kind of Israel's ability to influence the UK, and there's also the UK's desire to fall in line behind the US. Obviously, with Trump presidency coming in, it was Trump who recognized Israel's illegal annexation of the Golan Heights, part of Syria, in 2019. The UK then, with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, actually didn't go along with that, and it reaffirmed its recognition of the Golan Heights as part of Syria. But it's not as if it put sanctions or anything on Israel to punish them for illegally occupying another country, as it would do, say, with Russia. So, there's a bit of kind of dissonance there. And yeah, they have been giving Israel a pass for a very long time. Obviously, much of this annexation of the West Bank is pretty irreversible now, and Trump looks set to accelerate that. I think, the UK does see its place in the world, or UK elites see their place in the world as being a facilitator for the US. So having these bases like on Cyprus that the US can use is a way of kind of guaranteeing our status as a partner of the US. Equally, there's Ascension Island in the Atlantic, which is a major listening station for the NSA. So there are quite a few bases like this around the world where, and this was the motive for the Chagos Islands, right, was to keep some rocks that, the British, but also the Americans could use for military facilities. So I think, yeah, it will be interesting to see how far this Labour government goes with following the Trump administration's policy towards the Middle East. I can't give you a confident prediction about what we'll see there, but already they are starting to, David Lammy, when he was an opposition MP, our foreign secretary, he called Trump a fascist and a neo-Nazi, I think. And of course now he's gone and Keir Starmer's gone and met Trump and all the rest of it. So they're clearly trying to be on good terms with the Trump administration, and the consequences of that for Middle East policy will probably be quite profound, but we're yet to see exactly what they will be.
Coming back to Cyprus, as you well know, apart from Akrotiri, there's Episcopi base and also Declassified base, but we also have it's not a base actually, but the Troodos Mountains. I don't even know exactly what to call it.
Yeah. I think they call it a retained site, don't they? Rather than
yes,
site, it's been retained.
Yeah, well, they're using it basically to spy on the rest of the world, especially the Middle East. Do we have any information about that?
There was some stuff that came out, I think, from the Snowden leaks about how that station was able to tap into communications in Iran, but also Israel. But these leaks were from around 2009, when actually the UK had a slightly more circumspect position on Israel, and they would try and it was either the US or UK were hacking into Israeli drone feeds over the Golan Heights to check that they weren't about to do a major provocation with Iran. And GCHQ actually had this assessment back then that Israel was, as much of a liability in the Middle East. It could be as much of a threat to UK interests because, of what we've seen, the sort of behavior over the last year, the kind of provocative strikes with Iran that it's engaged in. 15 years ago, the UK was able to recognise that Israel might do things that weren't in Britain's national interest. That perspective seems to have been somewhat lost more recently. But again, that just shows the capabilities of that site up on, like you say, Mount Troodos, the highest point in Cyprus. And that's a really good example, probably one of the best examples of that base being used by the Americans as well. And obviously the importance of these bases for America and Britain's relationship with America and what Britain gives to America.
Mm-hmm. Since you've mentioned the Americans as well again, we do know, and this is from research that Declassified has done again, and also from what we can see on the ground, we do know that there are American troops stationed at Akrotiri. Do you have any idea for how long this has been going on, and if there has been an escalation or an addition to numbers since the war in Gaza?
Yeah, we've got good pieces on our website that have like the exact numbers and I think some of the history to it as well. I don't think we've got more recent figures on the increase in the last year, but obviously, like you say, it's pretty obvious these flights going out. We hired a cameraman to film outside the base, I think this last month, and in the footage you can see American Black Hawk helicopters, which aren't the type of aircraft that the British military operate. So they're not really making a secret of it, although, like you say, they're not supposed to be there. It is quite an extraordinary setup.
Okay. Just to get a feeling of what the British people think of what the UK is doing in the rest of the world. Are British people aware of what's going on? Or is it something that doesn't really bother them, or has that changed since the war in Gaza?
Yeah, I think more and more British people are aware of this British base on Cyprus and concerned about its role in the genocide in Gaza. But that's only really people who are consuming independent media, followers of Declassified and so on, which are growing, but they won't find this being covered in the mainstream, in the national press. And so, yeah, sadly, the vast majority aren't aware of it. We have seen more MPs asking questions, but yeah, like you said, the protest.
Jeremy Corbyn has asked questions as well.
Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn. There have been a couple of others as well. So I think kind of socialist left-wing MPs are concerned about it. Obviously, they're a minority in our parliament now. But yeah, but in Cyprus, it seems like it's having more resonance, our work, and it's good to see, the protests that have gone on there outside the bases. It seems like our work's being picked up there. I mean, you can probably tell me more about that side of it.
It has actually quite a bit, and just to let you know that one of the things that got people moving and got people to react were the pieces that you did in Declassified, because there have been rumors. People knew what was going on, but you just needed somebody to come out with facts and tell you that this has been going on, and these are the number of spy flights, and because you come out with facts every single time. So and there's no one from the UK government or from the military has said no, this is not happening. They just refuse to comment on it. So their silence is basically to us admitting that yes, this has been going on. And a lot of the demonstrations that have happened outside the bases are calling for the bases to leave Cyprus. And quite a few of the people that were there as well were British people, British citizens that happened to live in Cyprus as well. And they were holding up banners saying, "I'm ashamed to be British." And that is actually quite... it gives us courage to keep going on and keep fighting for transparency and accountability, because these are two things that the bases do not have. They don't have transparency. They've never let the Cypriot people know what's going on, even though that they should. They are obliged to if it puts the Cypriot population in danger. And during the attack from Iran, it clearly did. And especially before in June, when Nasrallah said that if Cyprus keeps facilitating, and I'm assuming he meant the bases, the war in Gaza, that they will attack Cyprus. Attacking a sovereign base does not mean that they're going to target the base exactly. There are people living around the base, and there are Cypriot people living in the villages right next door. So we got to feel the heat. Really, it was really intense at that point in time. You said, you mentioned mainstream media and independent media. Have you felt at all, has there been any backlash to the work that you are doing? Because we do see that there are journalists in the UK, not only the UK, but in all of Europe, that have been targeted because of the work that they have been doing on Gaza. I say thank goodness for social media, because this is what Julian Assange was reporting on in Afghanistan and Iraq, and this is why he was put in prison. And I truly do believe that what we are seeing now, witnessing on our mobile phones, is exactly what was happening before in Afghanistan and Iraq and everywhere else that the US and the UK invaded. It's just that we did not have the ability to see it live streamed on our phones. Richard Medhurst was arrested at Heathrow Airport, and his computers and laptops were confiscated, and he was interrogated and intimidated. Have you had any backlash?
We haven't ourselves, thankfully, but we're very aware of the climate that we're working in. And, we've seen Asa Winstanley at Electronic Intifada having his home raided, devices confiscated, but not arrested. It was all rather strange how they justified doing that. And obviously he's been reporting for a long time on Keir Starmer and the right of the Labour Party and Israel lobby groups and their influence on British politics. So yes, he's been covering a lot of these issues, and we've been doing the reporting like you mentioned, but no, we haven't had the police knocking on our doors. But obviously it's not a pleasant climate to be working in once they start doing that to other journalists here.
You mentioned that you are independent media. Independent means that you are not funded by anybody apart from people. we the people. And you are doing like a fundraiser now for research that you want to do in 2025. So this is your chance to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, so we've got a fundraiser at the moment to raise money for our investigations next year. The details are on our website. You can donate through PayPal. And yeah, we've had more and more people join us this last year, and that's really helped us keep doing this reporting on the genocide in Gaza, and particularly the UK's role through Cyprus, which I guess is something that we're doing that you won't read or see somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for all you do and the work that you've been doing. And hopefully, you'll get enough funding for next year, so you'll continue your good work. And who knows, maybe we'll see you in Cyprus soon.
Thank you, Melanie. Yeah, that would be lovely.
Thank you very much.